Hello everyone and welcome to week 9. This week we're going to cover potential problem behaviors that could occur at the library. And you will have to deal with something that we're going to talk about today. The 2 videos that I've posted in the folder are very important for you to watch and cover some of the most common problem behavior interactions. The Mad on Arrival webinar covers angry patron interactions. Not only does this cover some of the basics in how to handle these situations while they're happening, but it also gives you some mental and emotional tools for after that person leaves. Now the next one, the mental health first aid video, is an introduction to a seminar that many libraries today are offering to their workers. It talks about how to best handle situations that involve those suffering from a mental illness, and then some potential local resource tools that are available to help in particular scenarios. Now both of these not only offer very practical information that you will use over and over again, but just having these mental and emotional tips and tricks in your mental toolbox will help you the first time, or the next time, that you have to handle any such interaction. So those 2 videos will again cover angry patrons and interactions with those with a mental illness. What I'm going to talk about in my portion are some of the other potential interactions. And I have to say a disclaimer at this point. Many libraries already have a policy regarding situations such as these. So if they say something different than I'm saying, they win. Follow policy. But if your library doesn't have something, then that's a conversation between you and a boss or you and HR. In any case, we are talking about this so that you basically have a heads up about common situations and so that you have an idea of how you should react. And react you should. It is the responsibility of library employees to facilitate the comfort and the safety of those in the library, employees, and other patrons. And that doesn't mean that you have to handle everything yourself. It can also mean picking up the phone and calling a coworker, a manager, or even the police. So the original title of this lecture was Problem Patrons and not Problem, Behaviors. I changed it for a couple of reasons. When you say problem patron, it implies that the person is a problem, regardless of what they're doing at any moment. And we know that that isn't true, but it's easy to internally scowl and kind of keep a beady eye on that one person who screamed at us 9 months ago. The problem at any given moment is a behavior which causes the situation, and that's what we're going to address. Because no matter who the person is, certain behaviors will always have to be addressed. So, what are the problems? Well, many times the answer is a simple, you'll know it when you see it. Others aren't so simple and will have staff kind of huddled together to see whether or not they should intervene or say something. So the first one, policy issues are when somebody is breaking a rule, something that you can point to on paper because it is specifically addressed. Personality issues have to do with an individual who is exhibiting an annoying or bothersome behavior to either staff or other patrons. Health issues can cover those with mental illnesses experiencing an episode, somebody experiencing a medical emergency like a heart attack, and it can even address hygiene issues. And then legal issues have to do with those who are breaking the law, just flat out breaking the city, state, whatever law, but inside the library. Now, what I want to show you here, these are some tips from the National Crisis Prevention Institute on dealing with difficult persons. These cover all situations, from the angry patron about fines to those that you're having to ask to leave because, you got them watching porn. These are things to practice as a way to help not escalate problematic situations. So first, and you'll recognize a lot of these from us talking about customer service, but try to be empathetic. And yes, even if the person is yelling, and try not to be judgmental or to infer things about their person or character simply because what's happening in that moment. 2, you always want to make sure to clarify the message. Their actual issue can get buried in the emotion, so make sure you understand what the problem is. 3, respect personal space at all times. Now this can make some people extra nervous. to have somebody close to them. Plus, it puts you in a potential strike zone. This is also a special warning to those of you who like to touch, thinking that a hand on the shoulder shows support, comfort, camaraderie. Just do not touch. 4, you want to be aware of where you're standing. You don't want to be close to someone, you don't want to close somebody into a corner or block what they're thinking of as a means of escape. And then this one is hard, but where possible, allow them to blow off steam. And this doesn't mean screaming or yelling, but it can mean complaining. I can't tell you how many times the angriest patron who is allowed to vent, blows a breath out at the end and then says, I just wanted to tell that to somebody. I'm not mad at you. And then very often you'll get an apology. So next, setting limits can be done at the first cuss word. You can say, I'm interested in what you have to say, but please leave out the cuss words. And if you could lower your voice. Now, and say thank you. Same thing with threats or personal attacks. You can tell people the acceptable parameters, although of course this sets off a bunch of people, but at least you have created the permissible arena. And again, we covered this in customer service, but it pops up everywhere, doesn't it? You need to try to avoid overreacting. Now, some people just call it reacting or a natural reaction, but remember, it is your job to remain calm, rational, and professional. And another good thing to remember at times like this is there are often a lot of people watching. Observer empathy tends to stay with you unless you start to lose the professionalism. And believe me, as soon as that person raises their voice, everybody within earshot is turning to look. You want to avoid any physical techniques. This means don't push, don't grab, or otherwise touch the person. Talk about escalation. Now true, it's often the other person who is usually the first to break that personal space barrier, but the law and the policy are on your side until you start to give it back. So if somebody pushes you, any of those, walk away, call for assistance, run away. But regardless, you are allowed to protect yourself, when you are in danger. Okay, somebody is going to call you dumb, stupid, or any variation thereof, I promise, in whatever library you're in. Now, challenges can be made to, the policy, your authority, your training. Just don't react personally. This is where this can also help, setting limits that we talked about on the page before can come in handy, such as no name calling or I will have to ask you to leave, that kind of thing. 10, you got to be aware of your body language and your facial expressions at all times in these situations. Or I should say, that's true all the time, but especially in these situations. So think of it this way. You know what to do if you're in front of an angry dog, right? You wear your tone of voice, your stance, everything gets real calm. It is the same principle. The more the person that you're dealing with starts to lose control or lose their cool, the less they're actually listening to your words and they're reacting more to what everything else is saying. Now it's important to say, if the person still has to be banned or forcibly ejected from the library after you've done all of these things, it does not mean that you did anything wrong. Some situations just cannot be, resolved rationally. Okay. So this next list, these are communication tips from Bruce Schumann's book, Library Security and Safety Handbook, and are meant for dealing with difficult patrons, although I think they're good at any time. First, listen carefully to the person's words. Some of these will overlap with the ones that we just saw, but doing this is just considerate as well as good customer service. 2, use firm, assertive, but not aggressive language. And firm means that it's non-negotiable. You state it, and then that's it. Aggressive is, and what are you going to do about it? Or think of it this way. If you've ever read the words sneering or sarcastic applied to dialogue in a book, that counts as aggressive too on your part. And on theirs, but you can only control you. 3. Now, a lot of the things on the list we're looking at automatically bring to mind the angry yelling patron. But what if you have to talk to somebody because they smell like urine? And believe me, you're going to want to practice how to put those kind of things to a patron. So avoid, you know, you're literally being paid to be all of these things, or rather the opposite of all of these things. Not judgmental, condescending, any of these. So same thing with this, and specifically, you are being paid to be all 3 of these. And reacting negatively is a perfectly normal reaction, which is why there's training and practice to not react that way. And then 5, reacting emotionally on your part can potentially turn off the common sense, I'm at work and other people are watching button. And besides that, there may be a simple solution to situations that can only come to you if you know you are calm and reasonable. Now, number 6 is different than number 3. Try not to show anger, fear, disapproval, or disgust. This is controlling, again, your nonverbal cues, because people will start to pay attention to those. And number 7, it may not help you, but explaining your position and that of the library in a calm tone of voice, at least you are on record that you said it. And 8, stress your responsibility to the collection and other patrons. Perception is a wonderful thing. Stating a larger purpose for your and their place in that schema can be hard to argue against. And 9, here's back to that crisis management list. People who are doing any of these, the personal insults, the threats, they're looking for a reaction. Because sometimes, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. People will oftentimes get what they want just by being that big of a pain. And then, on that same note, they would have done this to whoever they got at the desk. It is not personal to you. Repeat your position as often as necessary. It is their job to batter against a wall, to batter against that policy, not yours. So just let it be said that the policy was not unsaid. Now, sometimes trying situations turn off our empathy, and that common sense bit we talked about before. But if there are alternatives to solve the situations, haul them out. This may mean moving people, changing computers, talking to managers, etc. But there may be something that you can do to, lower the volatility of the situation. And 12, they asked to see the boss, somebody higher up. This is absolutely going to happen, I promise. But whoever you have to go and get, don't let them go in blind. You could call somebody, but a lot of times if you go and get them, it gives you time to explain it. And to be fair on your part, saying some jerk wants to talk to you because he said I was rude isn't that helpful. That's not the kind of summing up. It's tell them what their problem is, what you've done, so that they know it's already been covered. And then in that case, they're just backing you up and giving them somebody else to vent to. All right, policy issues. Now, policy issues are actually some of the easiest situations to resolve. After all, you, the librarian, tasked with stopping or dealing with the behavior, is literally backed up by the institution, and you have the manual or the sign to prove it. Now, common bucks against policy include, but are not limited to, viewing inappropriate material. And this can vary place to place. Is a lady in a bikini on a computer screen considered inappropriate? My library ran into the issue of people watching R-rated movies in the computer lab, and we kind of had to make this call, because if they just pulled that up on a website, that would be inappropriate. But it's a movie that we're giving them downstairs, so it can be difficult. And plus, if somebody is caught doing something, what are the steps? Is it just a warning and they turn it off, or are they banned? What if another patron sees them but you don't see them? Is that enough to, start the proceedings, or do you actually have to catch them for you to be able to do anything about it? Now, decency laws in some towns may be such that it can actually be a crime to do this kind of thing in public, to look at anything like this. And let me say this out loud, but if you ever catch somebody watching child pornography, call the police. That is, just call the police. Okay. Inappropriate behavior. So, inappropriate behavior can be so many things. Yelling, cussing, cell phone use, eating or drinking where they're not supposed to, running, whistling, sex in the fire escape stairwell, and no, I'm not kidding, and don't ask. You name it. Any of those things that, you can point a finger at, you can generally know whether or not it's inappropriate. Volume is an especially big issue. Many libraries, while not the silent buildings of the past, still have quiet areas or regulations on volume. Tech centers are a hotbed for this, with neighbors complaining about earphone volume, for one thing. Now, you guys can probably fill a book, for those of you who already work a library, with some of the things that you've seen. But a lot of these have to do with disruptive behaviors or maintaining library property. There isn't always an altercation. It's often just you informing somebody of the library's policy on whatever inappropriate thing that they happen to be doing. Be careful though, be consistent. Nothing will set off resentment and finger pointing like an ex-offender pointing out the same offense that somebody else is doing that you are failing to address. So next is limited access to materials. And here oftentimes the angry patrons. Hell hath no fury is somebody who needs to print something and they can't because they have an excessive fine that's like 5 or 10 years old. Item limits, renewal limits, computer time limits, these are all actual policy issues that can send people around the bend. Just be prepared. Now this next one, loitering and or sleeping. This is one area that can be very different from library to library. In my library, for instance, you are allowed to sleep. We'll wake you if you start snoring, otherwise go for it. It's not hurting anybody. There is also no defined loitering. So again, this will differ. I've had classes before for people who worked in libraries, and they were actually very, like, how dare they sleep in the library? But this is a policy, and it won't be based off of your own feelings on the issue. So just be aware of your library's policy. And here's a fun one. No shirt, no shoes, no service. Or not. What about open shirts? Bathing suits or those Spanx that volleyball players wear? Underwear or bra showing? What do you do then? Now there may be town or city ordinances against such thing, but if not, what goes on, what goes at the library? Shoes and feet are another big potential issue. Are people allowed to put their feet on the tables? You may find it rude, but is there actually a rule against it? And many people are prone to kick off their shoes when they sit at chairs or tables, but it can also be a health issue, foot fungus and all of that jazz. And now I know we're talking about adult areas, but this will include interactions with children. So is there a rule about age limits in certain areas like the computer lab? How old can a child be before they're allowed to wander the library on their own while a parent is, say, in the computer lab? Are babies allowed in quiet areas, even if, they're quiet right now? What if a child is creating a disturbance? Do you banish them to the children's department or get the parent and ask them to leave? And teens can be a special circumstance too. Often in large groups, noise can be an issue, even if they're actually whispering. The more people there are, just the louder it gets. I always feel bad about that one because they're trying, but they're still too loud. And if two of the 8 that are there are being disruptive, do you kick out the whole group by association or just the 2 that are causing the problems? And adult services, in my experience, can be prone to harsher reactions than youth librarians or youth departments due to the sheer novelty of the situation, of having to interact with children or teens, or, I gotta say, a potential age bias. Animals. Are animals allowed in the library? Service animals are, usually by law. they're allowed to be in there. But what about the guy who brought in his dog because it's summer and he legally can't leave him in the car? In all of these situations, you have to be careful. You have to be consistent, and you have to know what the policy states in order to back it up. Don't start off conversations with sharp tones and negative words. Try to phrase it in a way that tells them what they need to do. An example is inappropriate cell phone use. Instead of saying, "You can't use your phone here," maybe wave your hand to get their attention and whisper, "Would you mind going to the cell phone friendly area? Thank you." It implies that they can't use their phone where they are, but you're telling them where they can use it. And with underage kids, I'll say, "Hey guys, where's your mom or dad?" And when they tell me, I'll say, "Let's go see them." When we get to the parent, usually on a computer, I'll say, "Hey, since they're under 7, we want to make sure that they stay safe with their parents. There are a lot of people here, Thanks." So the way that you say it can create or end situations. I'm not kidding. Now, there are some situations that you should not get involved in. You should call the authorities, either the library authorities or the police, for your safety and everybody else's. Now, intentional bodily harm is when they're doing something to themselves or somebody else, in which case that's called assault. Now, drunk and or disorderly can differ again from library to library. After all, even though they may smell like they bathed in Smirnoff, how do you actually know that they're drunk? I once thought that somebody was a very high-functioning drunk, and every time I saw them, which was about 5 days a week, as they were coming out of the tech lab, they reeked of hooch, or so I thought. And then one day I saw them availing themselves of the hand sanitizer that we keep outside of the tech lab, and they were rubbing it all the way up to their elbows. And that's a lot of rubbing alcohol. So I squirted some just to see, and sure enough, it was the smell that I had smelled coming off of them. So mystery solved, not a drunk. But if you are worried due to somebody's verbal or physical behavior that they may be a danger to themselves or others, a call to the authorities may be in order. We once called the police on a stumbling drunk who had driven there with 2 young children. So remember, the person's actions may not only affect them. This is also a good time to mention that even if somebody is stumbling or, has drunk symptoms, it isn't always that. It could be, a diabetic reaction to medicines, things like that. But when you're unsure and when public health and safety is in question, calling the police doesn't mean that they're going to be arrested. It means that the police are then able to evaluate a situation. Now, vandalism can be done to the building or materials, and it may not always necessitate calling the police. Highlighting a library book comes to mind versus spray painting the side of the building. But it does need to be addressed by library authorities, by policy, or legal authorities. And theft of either library materials or property. So thanks to camera systems, it can be easier to catch perpetrators if you know when and where they struck. But the police should always be called if a patron's property is stolen, not just so that they can, file a report, but also for the library's own liability. But again, libraries may have specific policy on what to do in situations like this. Now, harassment and stalking. This can happen to patrons as well as staff, and there should be a tipping point as to when the authorities should be contacted. If you ever feel in danger, that's a pretty good indicator. Next one, public indecency, and this is when somebody exposes themselves in a public setting. Now, a lot of times this is part of a mental health issue, but regardless, it's still a legal issue. And then trespassing can be when the public refuses to leave the library space. It can also be when somebody who is banned from the library property comes back on before their ban is up. And I know at my library that'll get the police called on you. Sorry, you can hear car sounds in the back. Something is going on today. So what are personality issues, you may ask? These are the annoying, borderline inappropriate patrons that aren't actually violating any policy. The chatty camper is the person who parks themselves at the desk or near it and continues to talk to you. They often comment on others' interactions, comment on the conversations that you and your coworkers have, and do the same for anyone unfortunate enough to sit near them. Now, it can be hard to be not friendly to these sedentary stalkers because they see any friendliness as permission to chat. But it's always a good idea to mention time limits, remind them that you are at work, and then watch what you say to each other, staff-wise when they're around. My library actually placed a white noise machine beside the reference desk because of a chatty camper, and now you have to be standing at the desk to hear conversations. But you have to remember to be professional and to make your statements conclusive if you want them to go away. And if and when other patrons complain about them for those same actions, then you have a means to induce policy. Worst case scenario, make a policy that will address the situation. Now, the complainer is the person who always stops at the desk to tell you what the library or you are doing wrong. They're often not angry at all, but kind of long-suffering and finger-wagging. They may also be the ones to come and tell you when somebody else is doing something wrong, and what are you going to do about it? This is where the listening skills come into great play, as well as body language. Actively listen. Address issues, if it's true, and sadly it often is, but watch what you do about feedback, because they will often be watching to see what you do, and then they'll come and ask questions about the interaction. And if some other altercation happens while they're there at the library, they're also often the first to come up for the scoop. So be firm about privacy, the privacy policy, but remain polite. Because they will complain about you too if given any chance. So don't give them the chance. Mental health issues. So mental health issues may manifest themselves in their speech, such as mumbling, or they may have physical symptoms, such as rocking or jerky movements. And these can often disconcert those around them, or run afoul of noise or talking policy. Your library has to weigh the response to the situation and then make a call. There is often not an easy answer. Now, the mental health first aid video goes into much more detail for when larger situations arise due to their illness. And next, health and hygiene. What do you do if somebody is noisily hacking away in the quiet area or in a tech lab? It's an involuntary response, but what if others start to complain? What if they are obviously not covering their mouth or sneezing all over library equipment? There have actually been First Amendment court cases considering the hygiene issue in public libraries. And some individuals have such a strong body odor that it not only emanates for a great distance, but it stays long after they leave, especially on, say, fabric-covered chairs. It can directly affect others around them. But what if they don't have access to facilities due to, say, their water being turned off, or they're homeless, or their mental illness actually makes it so that they're not physically capable of caring for themselves in terms of hygiene? Now, libraries should also inform all staff what to do if somebody is experiencing a medical emergency. What if somebody falls down the stairs or trips on the curb? What if somebody has a heart attack or a stroke or just faints? What if someone dies while reading in a chair? The answer for most of these will be a simple, call the squad, call 911. But if there are any family or friends with the individual, is it their call or is it yours because it's on library property? These can all be very tough issues, and it's a good idea to address such situations before they have to be addressed. Now, I can't stress enough how important it is for library administration and department training to talk about these potential situations out loud. If you don't bring it up, there is a higher likelihood of problem situations being handled badly or having a worse outcome than they had to. Also, as the employee, won't you feel more comfortable and well-equipped to potential situations if you know what is expected from you in terms of response and responsibility? If you already work at a library, take a moment and think about if you know the answers to some of these questions asked in today's lecture. If you don't, take some time to find out. If your library doesn't have an answer, it may be that a conversation needs to happen somewhere to address the lack. But regardless, knowing that these situations and more, and more besides exist, can help you be better prepared for when they actually happen. And some of these are going to happen. All right, and that is all from me. Please make sure to watch those other 2 videos. They will greatly, you want those in your toolkit for all of your professional life. All right, thank you and have a good week.